All
Anyway,
right,
so what are we going to talk about today?
right. So just for anybody who doesn't know you, Scott, just real brief background. They can watch other videos too. But just who are you?
I'm a podcast whore, actually. That's kind of what it comes down to. We were just saying I'm doing 4 of them this week, including my own. But I'm really just kind of a very, very curious meathead. I started working out when I was 11, and wound my way through college and figured out this is what I really, really like to do by the time I graduated. So I went to grad school and just stuck with it. I've owned a gym. I'm a licensed acupuncturist. I just keep that going. It's something I'll probably do, decades from now when the body is so broken down that you can hardly tell I ever lifted. And so I've always had an interest in, sort of uncovering the intricacies of the inner workings of the human body. And bodybuilding is a beautiful way to look at how nutrition, lifestyle, supplements, drugs, all those things all come together, of course, with the training, the stimulus.
Yeah.
And I love to friggin' train. So it was like a perfect soup to fill my brain with dopamine.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that you've stayed so relevant, maybe more relevant than when I first came across you, because as we discussed, I came across you, I think, on Intense Muscle, and that was probably 10 years ago now.
Right.
When I saw you there, and like Ken Skip Hill was there. I don't personally hear anybody talk about him anymore. I'm sure he's doing something, but even like DC, he kind of keeps to himself a little bit. People who were back then certainly know who Dante is, but he's not on podcasts. He kind of keeps to himself. You're,
Right.
I think, more well known now than you ever were, and like you've been on multiple podcasts. Obviously,
Yeah.
I think it's great that you kind of kept that going. It's cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, I can be verbose, and I've got a, I've got, I sort of span both sides of the fence. Like I'm a dude with a mohawk. You look at me, you think, okay, like, hide your purses, right? Watch your credit cards. Like, this guy's coming after you. I get stereotyped all the time, but on the other hand, I am sort of an intellectual to a certain degree. So
yeah, for sure.
So that blend is kind of unique, and you're right. Dante actually, this is my perspective, the lens I see things through. Dante's still out there and around. He's posting on Instagram a lot more, but his main thing is obviously a supplement company. And Ken still does podcast. It's part of the Think Big network, which they're calling what used to be Advices Radio. He does a podcast actually they record Sundays, I think. But so he's still. I just saw Ken a few months ago. He lives down in Florida now. So
does he? What, he used to live out in like Colorado or something, or some mountainous area? Yeah.
I don't think his, like, that's just kind of without any effort whatsoever. And he's more about, he's got a strong coaching business, lots of clients. But I'm an educator like that. I want to be able to try to at least serve up information, serve up ideas, and then let people partake of them if they so choose, if it tastes good to them.
Right.
So it makes sense, that even if and I'm not a very good marketer, but even if I were just worse than I am, which is almost hard to imagine, that I would, hopefully kind of move to the forefront of social media kind of stuff, because my job is, as I see it, to try to help people understand things. Yeah.
So, well, and speaking of like social media and all of that, right before we talked, we said we kind of have some limits on the call today, because you kind of got a new rule that by 7 o'clock or so, you like to be cut off from electronics and work. So kind of a two-parter. Why did you decide that, and how's it been going? What changes have you noticed?
Yeah, I've dug into this. I've never been a great sleeper, and I've actually ended up through an unusual chain of events dieting down and doing like 5 shows this year. So dieting and sleep does not mix very well. So that's been part of what's going on. And I know there's actually something known as chronotypes. I did an entire sort of segment on my Muscle Minds podcast on this idea that you can find in the literature that people are either sort of morning people, or they're nighttime people, or there's some that are just sort of mixed, somewhere in between. But the idea that got me digging into that, of course, is that so much of our circadian rhythms are sort of thrown off whack by modern living. I mean, we're basically set up, and they've done mine shaft experiments, and they can do the same thing with rats, where they just keep them in darkness all the time with literally no incoming light, and we'll run on like a 24.5 or 25-hour cycle, something like that, a little bit longer than a day. But what happens is every day you have the sun comes up, and that resets the circadian rhythm. So there's of course the circadian rhythm, pineal gland. There's circadian rhythms that can be actually entrained in terms of by eating patterns. So they've done this in rats where they they can sort of make food available at certain times, and then they'll notice that the rat's activity, because this is what they'd have to do when foraging for food out in the wild, will increase about those times when the food becomes available. So activity levels will match when they would need to be more active. There's actually molecular clocks. I don't know a whole lot about this, to be honest, but there's actually genes that are expressed sort of in a fluctuating circadian type fashion throughout the day. So much of our body is really set up to run based on the fact that we're on the planet Earth, going around the sun, we're rotating, and we got about a 24-hour day. Like, that makes total sense. That our biology is all about survival on this planet. And when we turn on lights and we, expose ourselves to all the things that modern living does, that is really a deviation from, what we evolved as quote unquote hunter-gatherers for the most part. It's something you don't really pay attention to because you're born into this. So like, this is just your normal, but it's like, gosh, look at all the diseases of sedentary living we have. That's not a problem for hunter-gatherers if you look at the indigenous societies that are still around, or if you look back time, because they'd spend like 4, 5, 6 hours, as the averages that I've heard quoted, foraging around. The rest of the time they just so they're active. They get in that basic they get their steps in on their phone, right? And before they had phones, and then they would just chill and they'd play and they'd have sex and they'd tell stories and do all the things that were involved with having a community and a tribe. And instead, we're exposed to you get up, you flip the light on, and instantaneously you have light. Oh, right. Shit. You know how awful, sometimes that's really awful in the morning. We're used to it, been doing it every day of our lives, most of us, but it's like, what? That's just the first thing you do is send in just a barrage of light that's in a frontal to your system.
Right.
And we caffeinate ourselves, and then we go and get in our cars instead of walking around or moving, which it's interesting. A lot of ideas that I see creeping through podcasts and on YouTube videos and people that are trying to help with health. Actually, I heard Ben Pekulski did a talk at a charity event that I did this weekend, the one we're giving money to. It was at his gym, so he gave a spiel, and one of the things he talked about was getting up and just walking in the morning. And it's like, that's what you would probably do, is kind of get up and check out the surroundings, make sure that your encampment's good to go, like breathe in the fresh air. So we don't do those things. Instead, we go and we get in our cars, we go to our stressful jobs. There's a kind of, I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's a huge spike in Western society in heart attack incidents in the morning hours of Monday. Imagine that.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
Everyone's stressed out, so they're having heart attacks because we don't want to go to work. And then we stay up really late and we feed our brains this sort of artificial sociality in the form of social media. And we go way beyond what the normal light of the day of the sun would have us experiencing. So I figured, you know what? At least one thing I can do, given all that, that's a little sort of abbreviated diatribe. I can. I've started using. Got a pair right here. This is these were like the cheapest ones ever, and they do make a difference. It's not huge, but just like some blue blocking glasses. These were like, I think I got 3 of them, and they were like what they should have cost. They're like $5.99.
Yeah.
I haven't dug it. There's not a lot of literature out there, but you see.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, there definitely is some impact there, and obviously the blue light is the wavelength that's most impacts the circadian rhythm. But actually, when I put these on at night, I do feel in a matter of a few minutes, and maybe total placebo, but I do feel a bit groggy. But falling asleep usually isn't my issue. It's staying asleep. So these don't really help me that much. Yeah. So anyway, that's the thing that I've kind of done. Like, literally, I'll wake up. There will be days I still have this issue. I'll be in front of the computer talking on the phone. There won't be a single person that I interact with unless I go grocery shopping. And then I just talk the ears off of like the checkout person or someone that I run into in the aisle, like what's wrong with this manic person?
Right.
So, by the time I get home, I've got all that sort of energy going. And what I've started doing then is just 7 o'clock is about when the sun goes down. I've just sort of put a line in the sand and said, you know what? That's when I have my Apple Watch, which I'm actually using. Actually, it doesn't do really much. I've got an Oura ring now to kind of give me an idea of sleep, which I don't trust in. There's only one study, and
I was gonna say, do you buy into this?
it has a very loose connection with how I perceive that I've rested. But it's so off. I mean, literally, like the Apple Watch can't even give me an accurate heart rate when I'm exercising.
Right. Yeah.
It's all over the place. So this is supposedly better. No, I really don't. But it gives me some sort of an anchoring point to kind of check in and say, okay, I think I slept pretty well last night. And the Aura gives you REM and deep sleep, and deep sleep is sort of more rejuvenating for the body. I've noticed when I've used Aura, what's a Fitbit I had previously that died on me, and the Apple Watch, that when overall, I mean, the correlation is not tremendous if I could like take all the data points, run them together, but overall, I have noticed sort of a loose association between the deep sleep and those sort of aches and pains, the soreness that I'll wake up with. Sometimes you wake up, you're like, okay, like I slept wrong. Okay, now my legs are really sore too, and so everything's sore.
Yeah.
And then there are other times you wake up, it's like in my diet's pretty much, especially in the last few months, it's been very monotone. And I noticed some connection there with the deep sleep in terms of how sore I am, how rejuvenated and fresh I sort of feel from a physical standpoint.
Yeah.
But like last night, it told me I had a ton of REM sleep, and I do have a recollection of dreaming, but I've done a polysomnography before when I was getting my CPAP prescribed, and it told me that, I was dreaming. I had all sorts of REM sleep going on, and I had the perception of being awake the entire night.
Really?
So, yeah.
That seems to be common, though, from what I've seen. Well, there's always people who they say, oh, I didn't sleep a wink. And then they do these studies, and then they find, well, actually, you were asleep 4 or 5 hours. I've had 2 sleep studies done on myself, and they actually, just because I've also been somebody who I don't know the last time, truly, I don't know the last time I fell asleep and stayed asleep the whole night since like maybe middle school. Like I just don't. And I used to think it's because I drink so much water, so I'm getting up to pee. But then I would try not drinking anything and I'd still wake up. And so I think what's actually happening is I'm waking up and then I'm realizing, well, I'm up, let me go pee. And I use like an app on my phone that is supposed to like lie down next to you and tell you, how much of this you're in and how much you slept. But one thing I have heard some, I guess, sleep medicine doctors say is one of the problems is you have so many things that you could focus on. Like I'm looking at my app, I'm looking at this ring, and it almost makes you too worried that you're like, oh no, did I not get good sleep? Crap. And now you're worried about it. And it's just like, just relax. Right.
Yeah. And I noticed, I was aware of that perception that might become an issue. And I'm like, like there have been times like when my Apple Watch, the battery's gone down, and so I charged, like right now it's charging, I don't have it on. And I like you go to bed, and like you normally have to press, I got the Apple Face set up so I can press the button like right as I'm drifting off. And I'm like, fuck it, I don't care. Because it doesn't, for me, my perception is it's definitely sort of an extra. In that it's like the information is not really for me that important, to be honest. It gives me something, and it gets me. It's sort of like, it's literally, funny enough, people give themselves like a little ribbon on their finger as a reminder. That's kind of what it is.
Kind of your reminder, yeah.
It's a reminder. Like I think you may have mentioned on my discussion board, I think it might have been you. Someone said that, make sure you don't wear your Aura when you're training, because you'll bang it up. Maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it's a
I don't think that was me, no.
Someone said that. So I take it off when I train, and I put it back on, and I have to charge it regularly. And it basically, it's like a $300 reminder to pay to be
Is it that expensive?
to be mindful. Wow. Yeah, I think they're It was $250. I can't remember. I didn't get there's a high end one. It's like $600.
Jeez, wow.
Yeah, it's silver.
Yeah, I think it's tough, man, because I even did like some CBT with sleep, and I know all the rules. I think it helps a little bit. I also know for me though, just reading. If I get in bed and read, like I'm just out.
Yeah.
But I think the electronics, it's just because it can be nice. Like I like to get in bed and like be on my phone. It's just kind of like a nice way to like kind of settle down. But I know it makes a big difference because I could be on my phone for, I mean, I don't do this, but I could be on my phone for like an hour in my bed and feel like I'm fine. But at that same time, I could just put that away and read, and 5 pages in, I'm just like conked out. So,
Yeah.
But it can be hard to force yourself to do it, especially like a certain time every night.
Yeah, my phone stays here in front of my computer. It never goes in the bedroom unless it's in my pocket while I walk through there.
Yeah.
But I've got this in my Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book. Sort of what I've sort of helped people with, and it seems to work for me too. Is this is part of this whole strategy. 7 o'clock, literally, as best I possibly can. I put the Apple Watch on airplane mode, and the phone just goes over, and I plug it in. I put it face down, so nothing's happening. So I can see what time it is if I need to. And when I'm using that, I can turn on it. There's the app that I use. You could turn it on manually to tell you when you're going to sleep. But nothing. The bedroom is like a sanctuary. Like that's like my thing. I've got I have a little aromatherapy I do in there, and it's not that necessarily any of that, like the lavender makes me feel sleepy or what have you. It's just like this is my time. Like it's literally like as if I were like a millionaire. Iron Man, and I just hop in my helicopter and I go to like my private little island that's completely separated from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I don't have to do shit in there. My phone, no one's coming through on my Apple Watch. My phone's nowhere near. Nobody's like that's my spot, and it's all mine. And and so it's literally like I'm on vacation. And everyone has probably, I hope at least, some feeling of having gone on vacation where like I had this once. It was the same kind of idea. It was when I was in graduate school and I had just finished my comprehensive exams and I'd done a lot of the work on my dissertation, and it was before Christmas, if I'm recalling this correctly. And so I took my finals for that term and everything went awesome. And I went down to Florida. I was living in Georgia at the time, and stayed with my parents, and I was just like, finally, I can unload all of this. And I remember, like, I slept perfectly, and I wasn't even trying to put down any extra food or whatever. I was just sleeping. I was going to the gym that was there and training, and I gained like 12 pounds, and it looked like it was all muscle.
Yeah.
It was just phenomenal. And that's what some people that I've corresponded with who when they finally sort of get their sleep in order, like body composition changes, and that fits with all the negative things that you see that happen when they deprive people of sleep.
Right. Yeah, no, the studies on sleep deprivation are pretty interesting to just see how impactful it is. It's kind of astounding.
Sleep is like the most important recovery tool that we have, I would say. I mean, aside from food.
Right.
Those two are like competing head and head. Like you have to eat enough and you have to sleep enough.
Right.
And so that's why I put it sounds like, I mean, literally, there'll be people that like are messaging with me and I say, I'm cutting it off now. I'm going to bed. And like, what? I'm like, I'm sorry. It's just like the rule. And they eventually kind of catch on to it, but it's such a foreign thing. And I have some people who know this, and people that I'm fairly close to, hello, Foxy. Yes, I know, we'll have to wait. They're wanting to go on their walk. And they know that I've set this, we've had this basic conversation just, one-to-one, but it doesn't register with them. So I'll get messages, that are coming in, like I get, maybe it's 7:05 and I forgot to shut things down. I'm like, oh, they're like starting up a brand new conversation. I'm like, I'll talk to you all day long. I am just craving conversation during the day.
Yeah.
A lot of times I love to we'll chat while I'm driving to do an errand, or I'll take a break and go do some things around the house, between the computer work. But when 7 o'clock comes, I just want to shut all of that down, because when that's all on, you're not in that relaxed mode. So
Well, I think it's tough too, especially if you're still in school. I mean, I was trying to incorporate that when I'm 28 now. It's not like I'm old, but like doing that in your low 20s is very tough because you are losing out on a lot of social opportunities. And it's very hard to go out until 11, 12, 1 in the morning on a Friday, Saturday, and then get back into a normal schedule during the week. And you kind of just got to choose. Do you want to be really social, or do you want to lose those social opportunities and have really good sleep? It's very hard to do both.
yeah, I mean, and I'm imagining myself, of course, that's when I was in my, you're invulnerable when you're in your 20s. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
So, but like if I had like a social life of any significance, and I wanted to do things late at night, I still would do the same thing with my phone. I probably would just, I probably don't get to bed till maybe 9 or 9:30. It's not like, I'm going to bed at 7:30.
Right.
Although I was doing that when I first started this to try to like really kind of train myself with the light and dark. But yeah, you're right. It's a very difficult thing to do, and people don't quite get it. But unfortunately, if the nice thing would be is if we gather some more sort of collective consciousness about this, like, well, how about we all shut off our phones and we actually have one-to-one conversations where we have limbic resonance, our emotional brains, our limbic brains can kind of connect to one another, and you can see the emotion in someone, and you can read their nonverbal communication. You can hold someone's hand or give them a hug or a fist bump or whatever the hell it is that you don't get when you use an emoji or an emoticon for that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've been guilty of it. There have been times when how I felt and what I sent out on my phone were very, very almost diabolically opposed.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Like, and that's emotion. That's practicing like emotional dishonesty.
Yeah.
But then I always recognize, like, well, this phone, like, there's almost nothing there. Like, that's a disconnect.
Yeah.
In so many ways from real human interaction.
Right.
So. That's the thing, that I'm disconnecting from some of that artificiality. And if my mom were to, well, she wouldn't be able to get through. My mom knows I normally have my conversation with my mom in about an hour or so, half an hour, literally just before 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I was going to say, we were talking about the research on that, and one of the biggest tools is sleep. One of the biggest tools is food. I think. I don't know if I know Eric Helms and Greg Knuckles of them, and they have MASS, monthly application of strength sport. Right. They put out a lot of great work there, but having been subscribed, I think close to a year now, you see that the end conclusion to a lot of these studies is it didn't have much of an effect, or like it was a marginal effect. And at the end of the day, it's this, and this that matters. Right. And I think that's something we've kind of known for a while, is like, you can kind of have this mental masturbation. And it's also, for people like us, I think it's just interesting to read about it, right? But for 95% of the population, these little details don't matter. Where do you see the future of some of this going? I mean, do you think I don't personally expect there's going to be any like giant breakthroughs unless there's maybe like genetic, changes that are able to be induced. Do you see anything on the horizon, any research coming out that's like actually going to be some sort of game changer, or do you think that's kind of in the past?
It lost me a little. You mean specifically related to sleep, or
no, just for like bodybuilding progress, muscle growth, fat loss, anything that's like I said, I could see maybe some sort of like if we can learn to manipulate genetics, then obviously that could do it. But short of that, I don't really see anything coming out that's like wow.
The CRISPR technology, that'll be. I mean, there's a guy, I don't remember his name. There's a guy actually who was a molecular biologist, a geneticist, who actually injected himself. He applied the CRISPR technology. I don't know the details well enough to even do it justice, but basically injected himself with the idea of inserting a gene for, I don't even recall what it was, and he did it all online. This was a couple of years ago. So that technology will be available, and actually probably is available and being used right now behind closed doors somewhere.
Were there any? Do you know if there were any effects?
I can't remember. He didn't get anything out of it. I think he tried. Maybe he found the gene was inserted, but it was something that he intentionally did so it wouldn't manifest in some pathology, like he wouldn't grow a second nose or something like that. But but yeah, this all can be done. Like this has all been done. You can that science. I'm not a geneticist, so I can't really comment specifically on where the technology is. But that's all absolutely utterly there. and possible. And even things like, I mean, just simply myostatin inhibition is the one that always comes to mind.
Right.
And yeah, you can that's an easy target.
Right.
There's some issues, like some of those animals have enlarged hearts with depending on the nature of the myostatin deficiency.
Yeah.
The different defects seem to manifest in different phenotypes in terms of muscularity of the different muscle types, smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. So there's some things there that, as far as I know, no one understands. I know, Suki, we'll go a little bit. Not right now. Hold on just a sec. No, Suki, no, good girl. Now she's back away. She'll just keep bumping my elbow unless I said
no problem.
So the technology's there. That's what will be those will be the steroids of the future.
Yeah,
absolutely. Like that's not very far off. In fact, I'm sure it's probably going. You can create these gigantic mice, the myostatin mutant mice.
Right.
I mean, those are already there. Those are bodybuilding winners right there in the
Are
the mouse.
Are they born with, like? Is it the case that those mice, because it's been so long since I've looked at those, that they are injected in adulthood and become like that, or they are born with the defect?
They're born with, those are transgenic, so they're born with the defect. They're kind of created in the lab, and then they're
right.
born.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
like
we still aren't able to inject a mouse currently, like an already alive mouse, and take away that myostatin.
No, they actually have done that as well. There are injections where they can have produce
like with
a localized effect.
things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's there.
Yeah, which is crazy. I know people talk about underground labs having it, and I would read some of these people's logs and everything, and they would report crazy results. Who the hell knows if it's real or not? But it's certainly an interesting topic. I know there are the heart issues that come along with it. I'm sure there's plenty we don't know, but it's a pretty fascinating concept.
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's not in all. There are various models of myostatin deficiency, and you can be homozygous or you can be heterozygous for a deficient myostatin gene in humans, and there are different deficiencies. Some of which end up with cardiac enlargement, and others don't. And some of them will end up with muscles that have lower specific tension. So for a given cross-sectional area, they produce less force.
Right.
And which sort of matches what people have sometimes seen. You see these guys in the gym and think, well, maybe they're just a pussy. How they're so friggin' big? How can they be so weak?
Same muscle, though, you're saying? Like a quad on one mouse compared to the quad on another mouse?
If you look at a particular myostatin defective or deficient, so it could be the gene is either deficient myostatin, that's one possibility, or something about the gene makes a defective or a less than fully effective myostatin protein. So, and I don't know the intricacies of the interactions of myostatin well enough to have an explanation for this, but if you look, I've looked into this literature before, and you'll find that one study found when they compared the strain of mouse with the myostatin deficiency or defect versus the strain that was the normal, hadn't been transfected, wasn't transgenic. No difference. The muscles were bigger, and the relative increase in force was the same as the relative increase in size. That's specific tension, force per unit cross-sectional area. And that's pretty much just kind of a standard thing. But then there are others where the muscles were weaker, as if there was something, the muscles were enlarged, but something about the orientation, the contractile proteins, or the nature by which they're contracting. I don't know that I've seen someone tie it down to fiber type, because there's some suggestion that type 1s have lower specific tension than type 2s. That would make sense just from an ATP turnover standpoint. You can use more ATP and thus produce more force more rapidly, or in type 2s. The myosin is faster.
Yeah.
But so anyway, that's one sort of easy potential target. There's so many things that are involved. Gosh, I came across something, and I think it's still open in one of my browser tabs. I came across something showing that it was a particular study, and I was down a rabbit hole somewhere a few nights ago, and there was an upregulation of the leptin receptor in the trained arm, but not in the untrained arm.
Really?
Yeah, and it's okay, well, this is cool. And one of the things they find, for instance, and I'm reading through this, was getting late, so I was kind of getting ready to shut it down. But
Yeah.
is that the leptin, the OB, and the DB mice? So one defective leptin, one has a defective leptin receptor. They tend to have more body fat, but they also tend to have less muscle mass. So something about the leptin signaling is involved with increasing muscle mass. So leptin deficient means, in one way, shape, or form, signal or the actual protein that's functioning means more body fat and less muscle mass than you'd expect.
Right.
So leptin's involved. Like, okay,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
you know, so there's a great one right there. Like, you want to make people really lean. You know, you create a highly you engineer a leptin receptor, or engineer a viral vector that goes in and, you know, replaces the leptin receptor with a leptin receptor that is more sensitive to leptin signaling, and you burn off more body fat and you have more muscle mass.
I'm surprised that hasn't. I mean, because even like back when I was in high school, I feel like they were talking about these like genetic differences and CRISPR. I don't remember when the whole CRISPR and like all that started, but I am surprised. I mean, maybe there are a lot of trials going on and I'm just not aware of them, but I'm surprised it hasn't been a little bit more widespread.
Yeah, there are ethical issues there that it scares people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, because like, one of the things that I hear people talk about, it's rumored. I know nothing about, you know, to what extent. It's just kind of a really cool topic. Is that like the Chinese, who tend to, like, you know, kind of blow past some of these ethical barriers that slow us down.
Yeah.
There are genes that are associated with intelligence, and that's a big taboo topic.
Oh yeah.
The idea that someone could be born smarter than someone else, holy shit, you know, some people are taller and some people are shorter, and some people have dark skin and some people have light skin, and some people might be smarter than someone else. No, that can't be it. Like, there can't be a genetic influence on intelligence, right?
I have a friend, just a quick tangent, but like I have a friend who his whole like Instagram is, he's a very smart guy, physician, and he is like heavily looks into like IQ research. And from everything I've seen, it's like really not debatable, right? I mean, just like from all the research that I've seen and that I've seen him post, and but you're right, people get very sensitive to that because they want to think that you could just work harder and anybody could go to Harvard or, you know, be, you know, this position or that position, and it's like you said, okay, so people are going to have different heights, people are going to have, you know, basically everything has a genetic influence, but can't be that, right? So
well, it's actually connected to bodybuilding here. We're kind of like on the periphery of bodybuilding with a lot we're talking about, but that's one of the things that hits bodybuilders so hard. Is the topic we were discussing beforehand.
Yeah,
is that, you know, you may just not have the genetics to look like Flex Wheeler. I mean, it's not like there's thousands of Flex Wheelers walking around on the bodybuilding stages of America or of the world.
Yeah,
it's just not there. So people, and that's one of the things that even attracts people to bodybuilding, is you can just work harder, and anyone eventually can, you know, look like Ronnie Coleman or be a pro or have a pro level physique, and that's just not true. There's a bell curve for pretty much everything that you examine, and so for a bodybuilder, like, that genetic potential is near and dear to his heart, his soul, his ego. That's super fucking important, you know.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, right. I know, that's what I'm saying. You know, it's like,
right.
Why? Like, I'm a failure. I can't get huge. But for the average person, like, that's the ultimate sort of social leverage in a certain way. I would think. I mean, especially someone who's insecure, and that you can kind of judge the level of insecurity based on the nature of the comments that you see sometimes.
Right, sure.
But it's like basically, like, if you're going into a social arena, your level of intelligence basically is kind of like going into a battle arena, and what armaments do you have? Like, do you have a battle axe? Do you have a gun? Do you have a slingshot? You know, a rubber hammer? Like, what do you have? Your intelligence is basically what you're equipped with for success in life, is what people would even put forth, you know, and there's associations there, you know, and so people put that, they value themselves based on IQ and intelligence. And then, of course, you know, flip that back around. It's like, well, if you're telling me that, you know, there's, you know, someone's more intelligent than me based on nothing they did to earn that, then that doesn't make people very happy. So anyway, so the intelligence thing, it's a fascinating topic.
You're saying something about like the Chinese
Oh,
I don't know if that
the
was,
Chi-
yeah.
yeah, that's where I was going. Well, the Chinese, there are genes that have been found to be associated with higher levels of intelligence.
Yeah.
So that's what apparently the Chinese are sort of have been experimenting with,
Mm.
is trying to figure out how to engineer a superhuman, super intelligent human, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine, especially as people, like, one of the things that that friend of mine mentioned in his Instagram, he's like, oh, people want to say, it's not about IQ, it's about hard work, or like, you shouldn't focus on that. And then what he says is like, okay, so, you have a baby that's about to be born. Would you choose, if you could choose to have it be higher intelligence, would you? And almost everybody would say yes, right? Because now that it's not just, oh, like the generic population, it's your family member, it's your baby. I'm sure you would try to give it, because it is important, right? And that could apply to a lot of things. But the reality is intelligence is obviously very important, especially in our ever developing world, right?
Yeah.
100 years ago, there probably wasn't such a high correlation between IQ and life success. But as we keep getting more and more developed, it does. I mean, that's a whole another
Yeah.
topic, but yeah, it's very interesting.
I think there's some movies, and I'd have to ask. I know someone, I'm not going to say who it is, who used artificial insemination to come up with person's children. So you get a number of fertilized zygotes,
Mm.
and they can genetically screen those. There's different combinations, and you might end up with that one has, a higher percentage of getting leukemia, higher risk of getting leukemia or having early onset Alzheimer's, or
Yeah.
whatever disease factors you want to profile for. And I'm trying to think. There's movies, I don't watch enough movies, and I usually fall asleep when I start to watch them. But there are movies where that's been kind of a theme, is where you go and you pick the best potential from all the fertilized zygotes based on a genetic analysis of what's there.
Yeah. No, I'm
So,
sure stuff like that's going to be more and more
oh,
common in the future. Of course.
yeah, yeah. So from a bodybuilding perspective, it'll come along. It's a hard thing, like just with bodybuilding research now, like you can't really justify getting a lot of money for that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
A lot of other things out there.
yeah, but of course, I would imagine there's also tons of sci-fi movies about like super soldiers that have
Mhm.
been genetically engineered.
Right.
And it's funny because that was one of the things that I'm tying some things together that Ben Pekulski was talking about. His topic was HRV, heart rate variability,
Hmm.
and one of the things that he mentioned, and I can't provide all the details, but he talked about that some soldiers are actually, he said it actually in Russia, that one of the things they used to screen, I believe it was cosmonauts or some high level soldier of some sort, was their ability to really control the level of sympathetic or parasympathetic activity that they have. Because when you go into a high risk, highly energized, dangerous situation, you have to remain calm so you can execute your operations, be it, work some kind of a computer or fire missiles or basically survive without freaking out. So he said that one of the tests was to be able to basically like sort of adrenalize yourself up to a heart rate of 90, and then within a matter of 10 seconds get it back down to like a resting of 40, something like that. So yeah, so there's something to say though for that the government has a lot of money. Governments have lots of money. So if some of the aspects of having a lot of muscle mass, and how many bodybuilders? There's the two things actually that kind of fit in. One is, and I mentioned this in my talk before I knew what Benny was even going to talk about, but one of the things I've noticed with a lot of really highly successful bodybuilders, you can kind of run through the litany in your head, like people like Dexter Jackson and Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler. A lot of them are really pretty chill. They're pretty relaxed. And I can't imagine Ronnie like lying awake, like mulling over like stuff that bothers him. Ronnie just like, he's just, everything's good, and
Yeah.
Dexter's the same way. And they just handle stress really well. So, but they're also able to get in there and get after it and train. That's kind of a personality trait that is an advantage for them. But that's why one of the reasons why I think just being able to sleep and basically get yourself into rest, repose, digest, and recovery mode
Yeah.
outside of the gym is super important. Even if you have to sort of engineer it into your life in the way I have.
Right. Yeah. Maybe like force yourself to do it.
Yeah, you mentioned like Greg Knuckles. I do listen to their podcast, and they've mentioned so many times how horrible of a sleeper he is. He'll just go like, 2 days he could just crank, all night long. And I've been able to do that. I've done that in the course of my graduate career. I can get going, man. It's like, boom, I just go into the information, and it's like I'm in this matrix. And next thing I know, it's 4 a.m, and I'm like, I'll just keep going, baby. Pulling all nighter. Biggie. Yeah, I can do that.
I'm so not like that.
Yeah, I don't like that I can do that, but I've, some of that's maybe just sort of willpower. But so the government, but back to the genetic manipulations, even being able to look into like what are the genes involved with these abilities to sleep really well, or these circadian molecular clocks that are involved. There's the genetic component there, without a doubt.
Sure.
So that when it comes to the bodybuilding and muscle mass, that's where I think that, the government behind the scenes type of stuff to try to get ahead of, unfortunately, get ahead of the other countries that we, we don't consider part of our whole overall, world. Like it's us versus them. It's the tribalism that's in the way, but it's also going to be what probably drives that technology, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Doing shit. Yeah.
So do you think that, that obviously will change a lot, but do you think there are practical things that people are implementing now with the research that's coming out? You've got like one example I like to give is like diet breaks, right? So if you look at like, just not even that long ago, like when skip loading was really big, right? That was when I was in college. That was only 8 years ago. I don't personally know anybody who does that now. Now there's some research coming out, well, for probably a year or two now, that these like week-long diet breaks are providing big advantages. I've seen several coaches kind of switch to that. Are you seeing practical things? Like, for instance, your Fortitude training book and everything was very comprehensive. Obviously, your own bodybuilding coach was as well. Are there practical changes that you would actually make now, or are these more like just interesting to pontificate about?
I'm not sure I quite understand your question. I thought I knew where you were going until you phrased the last sentence.
Basically, is the research that's coming out changing anything in how you actually go about, like if you were to write Fortitude training today, would it be any different at all? Would there be little things, or not really? It just hasn't changed the fundamentals.
I'm kind of rewriting it now, and I'm adding some things in. I'm adding some things to the training system as other versions. So the basic core information isn't going to change dramatically. But one thing I thought maybe you're getting at is, and I hear this now. I just read this on a discussion board. I think I read it on 2 different discussion boards in the last couple of days. Was when one person named me in particular, is that high frequency training seems to be the way to go, especially for like natural athletes or for most people. So pros obviously don't train that often, very, and we may have talked about that on this podcast.
I think we have. Yeah.
But like that idea of high frequency training is just, I don't know, no idea to what extent Fortitude training contributed to this, but everyone's giving that a shot, or at least it's in all the conversations as to one of the major training variables. It seems like, at least online. So that's huge.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, I think. The fact that people are wearing like sleep rings and they're paying attention to this, that's information that is filtering down into the community. That you talk to some of the old school the chicken and rice, just buck it up and suffer.
Right.
Whatever. No, like you don't. There's like none of it. Just suffer through it. The harder it is, the better.
Right. Yeah.
Something that, in fact, I co-wrote a chapter in a book like 10, 15 years, a long time ago now, probably 15 years ago, with my mentor, Gary Dudley, who's passed on now, on the use of electrical stimulation in strength and power sports. Wasn't much information around back then, but he'd used a lot of e-stim in his research, and I did in my dissertation work. We did a lot of e-stim related things when I was there at Georgia. And that the technology that we use is not really available to anyone unless you happen to be a physical therapist. or you can break into a PT clinic and, get on like a Kincom or a Cybex dynamometer, a $50,000 or $100,000 machine, and with a really high amp, high current stimulator. But people are starting to use a Dexter Jackson brought his legs up substantially at the Tampa this year. He was kind of missed the mark, I think, at the Olympia, although he looked phenomenal. But he's attributing that to an eStim device that just keeps on popping up, and I'm going to have to go look into this. Yeah, and there is rationale behind that. If you have the issue with using a really powerful eStim device is that this can go into a big tangent, but there are motor points along the surface of a muscle. So basically, the density of the neurons, if you look sort of across the surface of a muscle under the skin, varies depending on how the innervation is constructed, basically in the muscle. So when you stimulate a muscle with a transcutaneous eStim with just stim pads, you can, if someone's used a TENS unit and they just maybe plopped it on someplace they weren't supposed to, you can see that. If you slide it back and forth, you'll hit a spot where you get a much stronger contraction than if you're further away from that. So if you're doing eStim during like a dynamic contraction, like a knee extension or something like that, you have to be careful, because that if you're using stim that produces a pretty strong muscle contraction, that's going to move across. It potentially can move across that motor point, and you can run into some issues if you're trying to use a lot of juice. And I think I may have told these stories. Like there's one guy I know he's a researcher, used to do a lot of stim, and he was just kind of a really cool guy. And like one time he was trying to build his delts using eStim. And he's literally trying to do like side laterals with electrodes on both delts. And so he turned the stim up to what he thought was going to be, just something to kind of add to the contraction. And that's the idea of what's being used now. And he did the side lateral, and when he got up there, the pads had moved across his delt to the point where the contraction was so strong he had to drop the dumbbells, and it was like a max effort to bring his arms down and turn off the machine.
Wow.
Yeah. So like Dudley told me a time once he'd strapped himself into an isometric knee extension machine just with a tensiometer on it. We built one when I was there in Georgia too for the same purpose, and he was futzing around trying to figure out some, maybe a frequency force curve or something like that, and he was doing all these things by himself, and he accidentally pressed the on button or bumped the dial, and the stim came on, and it literally threw him out of the chair. His quad contracted.
Really?
He couldn't hold it. Yeah, it was that much force. So you can, with a really powerful stimulant, you can produce more force than you can voluntarily.
Wow.
But the thing that can be done, and the Russians have done this, and this information is way back in the back of my head, but you can sort of supplant the normal muscle contractions, the normal activation patterns, with transcutaneous stim, which is apparently what people are doing with these devices now. And you got to be careful with it. You can't do all the contractions involuntarily with the eStim, but if you can add to that, and the stimulation when you probably know about Henneman size principle. Someone's probably mentioned it many times on the podcast. Yeah. So there's an orderly recruitment based on the size of the motor neurons in the spinal cord that basically dictates you go from the slow, fatigue-resistant, typically type 1, to the faster, more fatigable, typically type 2 fibers. And that's just the way you go as the force requirements go up. You start to lift lighter to heavier and heavier loads, or as you're performing some exercise and fatigue tends to accrue, you move from those more fatigue resistant to more fatigable motor units, and eventually you may reach a failure point, the end of a set or what have you. So eStim doesn't work that way, because it's going in through the motor neuron at the level of the muscle. It's actually sending signals back up to the spinal cord too, but the contractions, because it's going in, it's not actually causing depolarization directly in the plasma membrane, the cell membrane of the skeletal muscle cells. It's actually depolarizing the neurons, and then acetylcholine is released, and then the neurons contract. So rather than, for instance, activating the type 1 fibers or the fatigue-resistant fibers at 15 hertz, which gives them a nice smooth tetanus, and that's all they need because they're slow. Hi, Blitzy, yes. They're going to want to go soon.
Sure.
Well, they want to go a long while ago. We don't got it. We can keep going, but And when you call upon those more fatigable fibers, those typically need higher frequencies. They're faster. So in order to get keep them from contracting and relaxing with each impulse that's sent down, they need to be signaled at a higher firing rate or higher firing frequency. But the E-stim, you put it at 30 hertz, it goes to 30 hertz for the slow and for the fast. And it doesn't basically pick and choose. The research is pretty mixed here, but it doesn't follow that same normal orderly recruitment pattern. And it doesn't rotate among motor units. All the strategies that the nervous system has developed to prevent fatigue aren't evoked by E-stim. So what you do, though, is you add the E-stim on there, and you create at least two things that I can think of that are probably conducive for muscle growth. One is you create this sort of abnormal contraction pattern. So one of the things, for instance, when we're doing my research for my dissertation, we would have people sitting on a knee extension, an isokinetic knee extension device. So this is I don't know if you can see my finger here, but this is the knee, and the stim pads would be on the quad, and basically turn the stim on, and the machine would allow you to extend your knee about 1 second up. The stim's still on, and the machine would force you back down, like that.
By lessening the stimulation?
The machine was set to go allow up for a second and come back down. The stim stayed on the exact same thing. The isokinetic device. It's stronger than any human, primate, anyone you put on there. Right. 10 times as strong. So you could do voluntary contraction. If you wanted to, you could just push up as hard as you can. As long as you kept on pushing up, once you got the full knee extension, it's just going to bring you right back down. It's a forced negative, basically.
Right. Wow.
So when you looked at the force patterns, normally there's inhibition on eccentrics, and it's probably a protective mechanism. Well, when you turn on that E-stim, it activates a certain volume of muscle based on how much current you have on. You'd extend, and the machine would, you're at full extension, and then you'd be a forced negative with no inhibition involved. So the force is tremendous. Wow. Same amount of muscle. Normally less muscle would be activated. You just can't activate as much muscle as an eccentric.
Sure.
So isolated muscle.
So my friend bought one back when we were in Baltimore, and I just kind of, I just laughed, and he eventually returned it. He didn't think it did anything, but he was using it because it was sold as like a recovery tool. Like he was like doing it at home and like for a week. Yeah, and he was like, at first he was all about the hype, and then he was like, no, this is stupid, I'm returning it. But you're talking about using these stimulations for like during the workout and to be able to increase the level of contraction.
The training, the model, the resistance exercise model that we used for my dissertation was no voluntary contraction at all E-stim. And the overload.
What was it compared to? Or was it?
We just trained one leg.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a creatine versus placebo. There was no overall effect of creatine. It didn't reach significance. But the nice thing about that model is compared to another study where they trained one leg voluntarily, the other leg with E-stim, is you can get about twice the rate of muscle growth with the E-stim.
Really?
Because you have tremendous eccentric overload. Forces produced higher than you could ever voluntarily, but with a lesser amount of muscle. So let's say you turn up the juice, so you got to the level of maybe like 70 or 80% of a maximal isometric contraction. So this is a whole other topic, but let's say you're someone who, when they do that maximal isometric voluntary contraction, you can activate 100% of the muscle mass. So you turn up the E-stim, so you're getting like 80% of that MVC.
Yeah.
Maximal voluntary isometric. So you're activating like maybe about 80% of the muscle, roughly. So you do that concentric contraction, you're activating 80% of the muscle, and then when it comes back down, you'd get probably, in that example, you'd probably get about 20 or 30% more force on the eccentric than you could if you pushed as hard as you could voluntarily. So you're producing more force than you could ever voluntarily with only 80% of the muscle.
Yeah.
So the overload is tremendous there.
Sure.
So that's why the growth is so
I would imagine, though, and I know we got to wrap up, but like I would imagine you could say something similar about if somebody said like all eccentric training, right? If you had somebody do all eccentric training, there is so much force there, and maybe I'd have to, look up the studies, but maybe that would initially cause more growth. But would the issue there be like recovery? And at the end of the day, do you think it's going to improve somebody faster than like traditional training long term?
There's Schoenfeld has a meta-analysis out there on concentric only versus eccentric only, and it favors eccentric only contractions.
Mm-hmm.
So they do seem to be really important. The study that Dudley did, my advisor, he worked for NASA for a while. One of the things you don't have in space is gravity, of course. So you don't have any eccentric loading. Like you like everything is you're just pushing off things all the time, but you're never having to break yourself.
Right.
So they've created several devices. They created some devices where like you could do like a spinning wheel where you'd load up this spring and then you'd have to resist it on the way back to do eccentrics. And that was based on some land-based research they did. One of the studies that I usually talk about when I mention this topic is they had people do leg presses. I think it was leg presses only. It's like 5 sets of 10 to 12, concentric only. So they lifted up and then someone lowered the weight down for them. So no lowering at all. And then they had a condition where it was 5 sets of 10 to 12, lifting and lowering. And then they had a condition where they did 10 sets of 10 to 12, only lifting. So when they doubled the volume with only lifting with no lowering, they still didn't get the same extent of muscle growth. Especially it was actually in the type 2 fibers that they got when they just did 5 sets with lifting and lowering.
Wow.
So the lowering it produced so much more force. That's where you get the real tensile stimulus. You still get it when you do concentric training. Concentric only training produces more metabolic stress, though. You're highly produce a lot more force with very little metabolic demand during eccentric. So concentrics probably get, if you sort of had to parcel it into these two things, you're probably getting more of the growth from a metabolic stress as opposed to tension, because you just don't produce as much tension during concentric.
Yeah, and you must be pretty limited with like going to the Easton thing. You must be limited in the exercises. Like certainly, leg extension seems like a perfect thing to do it on, right? It hits it. But I can't imagine you could do that really that well with like a dumbbell bench or anything. Like you'd probably have to stick to machines.
Well, that's the thing. If you're just doing E-stim in the way that I did it with my dissertation, or using a lot of it, yeah, you'll sublux your shoulder. You can fuck yourself up pretty bad. Like But that's why I want to investigate these machines, because if you do superimpose some E-stim on top of a voluntary contraction, and you probably will get some motor units, depending on how much you use, that you wouldn't have activated anyway. And there is some data suggesting a reversal of Henneman's of the size principle, basically, so that as you first activate the type 2s before the type 1s. And the type 2s are the ones that would typically be activated only at the end of a set under extreme fatigue. So that's an advantage, to be able to tax those early on. And then so you're also activating in this artificial way at either, like, if the frequency is too low, well, then you're producing force, the force is coming down. So it's like this jumpy tetanus. Just imagine a muscle that's doing that. Well, it takes ATP to detach the myosin and actin, and it takes ATP for the power stroke of the contractile contractile cycle to happen as well. So it actually takes more energy to produce an average force when it's going up and down than if you just held it steady like that. So if you got like a suboptimal firing rate, you're going to create more metabolic demand and more metabolic stress. And like when if you have that stim on them, and some of those motor units will be turned on during the concentrics and then turned off during the eccentrics, they probably stay on during the eccentrics if you've got the E-stim on them. So those suckers get loaded, like in my dissertation study. So you're producing like this very inefficient, metabolically stressful, highly tensile, high tension requiring type of bizarre contraction that basically is really good for making a muscular callus. Yeah. Because you're basically forcing the muscle to undergo a stress that you normally wouldn't, because the nervous system always protects you against that much of fatigue or producing those kinds of forces during eccentrics. It inhibits, or it figures out a strategy, an activation strategy to change. There's also a change in the frequency as fatigue occurs too. It's called muscle wisdom. So you're rotating motor units, you're changing frequencies, the nervous system doing all these things to allow you to prolong the contraction or the activity or whatever the exercise stress is in this case. And when you use E-stim, you're fucking it all up. You're like, it's the wrong frequency. You're not rotating amongst anything. You're leaving the fibers on during eccentrics when they don't need to be. So you're producing damage and metabolic stress in a major way, and lots of tension. So it makes sense then. It's just a small amount, if it's brand new and novel, kind of in the way like you've been doing knee extensions and leg presses and like, hammer strength squats, and then you go and do like a front squat, or you do some machine that's got a different loading curve than what you're used to, you'll get sore as shit.
Yeah.
The first time you've done it. Well, that's one of the main theories as to why we get sore is because of the novelty of the exercise. And probably some of that is related to kind of a learning curve and figuring out how to do the movement in a way that's kind of coordinated, that prevents damage, that minimizes metabolic stress. So you get better at it. You don't get as sore. You're less fatigued, even though you may not have any, enzymatic changes in the muscle that make the muscle any better at with withstanding fatigue. It's simply the nervous system figured, oh, okay, now I know how this feels.
Right.
So new exercises do that. When you put E-stim on there, it makes every exercise a new exercise because you're overriding the nervous system's ability to learn how to prevent damage and how to prevent fatigue. So you're just saying, nope. Yep, I'm running the show here. So that's, I think, why that would work with even small amounts. So I want to see what these guys are doing.
Yeah, I think everybody's going to ask where we can get this now.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. I know people. I'm not going to say, but yeah.
Yeah.
Figured that out. That's
right.
Just the story about Dexter has been all far and wide. So
yeah. So I know you have to go. Can you just briefly, before you go, just let us know about the charity I'm donating to today, like what that was and how people could maybe donate?
Oh yeah, let me let's get the website here. I just sent it to you.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, it's called the Spring of Tampa Bay, and basically it's a charity for a women's shelter. So women who've been fleeing abusive environments. I think they also focus on children and men too, but mainly women. So this was something that Jamie Pinder, IFBB Pro Jamie Pinder, women's physique competitor, put together. She's been doing this up in Connecticut for a while now, and I kept on seeing her at MI40, and I ran into her at up in the Northeast. I think I ran into like 2 different shows actually. I can't even remember which ones they were. And she mentioned this. I'm like, oh, you're raising money? I'm like, hey, if you want someone to do a talk, let me know. So I said, okay, cool. So we figured out I could do that at Ben's place on Sunday. Saturday was all women. I'll say this now for anyone who listens, because I got a lot of messages afterwards from guys who are like, dude, I would have loved to come hear your talk, but I thought it was a women-only thing. I'm like, I'm not a woman. They let me in. So it wasn't totally clear because the Saturday event was actually somewhere else, and it was only women. The Sunday one was at MI40, Ben Pekulski's gym. So, and it was open gym. I figured it would just be absolutely packed because that gym is, it's pricey. He has a pretty high membership rate to try to keep it, somewhat small so people can have plenty of space to train in and have the trainers there and that sort of thing. But anyway, they'll do another one, but it's the Spring of Tampa Bay, and I think it's called Women's Day Tampa is what the fancy name was that Jamie came up with. So
cool.
Really good.
Actually, I hadn't had anybody this whole year I've been doing this. I've had nobody mention that type of charity until like 2 weeks ago. Somebody else, it was more of a national organization for it.
Okay.
But yeah, Miguel Blacut said it. So yeah, but this one will be cool with more like local, and I'll have that link that you sent me as well.
Yeah, important stuff, man.
Definitely. Well, Scott, always more questions at the end of this that I have than when we started.
I know.
I'm sure we'll get you back on at some point in the future.
Yeah, we'll have to maybe go a weekend or something like that. It's just it's past my 7 o'clock. It's past Grandpa's bedtime.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to keep you up. So I'll let you
bedtime,
go.
and we're gonna go outside and enjoy nature for a little while as the sun starts to set here. Go for a dog walk.
All right, man. Thanks for talking.
Hey, and dude, you probably don't get thanked enough, but I mean, it's sort of like when I've told people, and I was talking to Jamie, I'm like, this guy, he does a podcast, and he just gives money out of his own pocket for charities, depending on what the guest wants. That's just cool as shit. So thank you for for doing that. It's like it's a wonderful idea. I remember kind of when you came up with it, but
Yeah.
it's really fucking awesome. So it's nice.
Well, thank you for acknowledging.
Nice. Yeah, it should be acknowledged. It's a good deed for sure.
Thanks, man. And we'll talk.
Yep. All right, brother.